Hello, my name is Jessica Stauffer, and this is my video reflection for Module 2 of Educational Psychology. The first question is, how am I or how can I using theories of self to understand what shapes and motivates students in my class with the goal of more effective instruction? As a classroom volunteer for a 4th grade elementary school, I can use the theories of self to understand what shapes and motivates students in my class with the goal of more effective instruction by using the theory of self-efficacy. According to the lecture that was given for Chapter 6, the definition of self-efficacy is the belief that you are able to achieve. What this means is if you believe that you're able to achieve, no matter what it is, you'll be able to do so. The book stated on page 115 that self-efficacy strongly influences many classroom behaviors, including task engagement, performance anxiety, stress persistence, and use of academic or social coping strategies. I can also sit with my students and discuss self-efficacy with them. I can kind of pinpoint exactly where the issue may be when the student is not being successful in a certain task. For example, if the student is not doing well in math, we can sit together and work out why this is happening. Is it because the student has a self-efficacy that they are not good in math? Or is it perhaps that the student didn't allow enough time to study, or the student didn't practice the material enough? What we can do is to work on building the student's sense of self-efficacy, their belief that they're able to do well. The student may say, okay, I'm really not bad in math. What happened was I didn't allow myself enough time to study, or I set myself up for failure because I believed that I couldn't do it. By changing the student's thought process, we could really make a difference in promoting a positive behavior in the classroom and really help with their engagement. Another thing that I can do is sit with my students and explain to them that I have expectations for them and what those expectations are. By letting my students know that I have expectations and what they are, I'm setting them up for a level of accountability. That way we're on the same page with one another. I can also tell my students that I have proximal goals for them upon the completion of each unit. According to the book on page 127, what I can do is say with my students, upon completing our day together, I want you to be able to successfully spell the word railroad. That's one example that I would do with my students on a one-on-one basis during my volunteer work. I would also like my students to tell me what expectations they have for me as their teacher. I think that's a good focus. That way I can see what my students are looking for as far as me as a teacher, and it also makes sure that I'm accountable to those students to teach in the manner that they want from me. Also, the expectations can let me know whether or not I am being successful in how I teach my students. Maybe my students would benefit from me taking a different teaching approach. Maybe they would learn better if I were to provide them with more performance-based tasks and hands-on experiences. I really think that the feedback and the expectations would be a key factor that would help motivate my students. The feedback, I think, in a timely fashion, the book discussed, is crucial for students. That way they can see how well they're doing and what areas they need to improve on. By being able to have feedback, they're able to see how they are succeeding, and then they can see ways that they can improve and continue to build upon those things instead of going blind with things. I also really think that it's important to make sure you're making the information meaningful for your students. The book discussed that by having meaningful choices, the more likely the student will be to be interested in the material. I believe they discuss this on page 128 or 127, somewhere in there. I try to do this through my work as a volunteer by allowing the students the opportunity to pick out the books that we're going to be reading when we read aloud to each other, and I work with reading comprehension with the student. I do this by allowing the students to pick what interests them, because this is a way that motivates them to want to learn. It motivates the student to want to read. Especially for some students who may struggle with reading, I think it's important to allow them that outlet to be able to pick out a book and let it be something that interests them. That way it's really sparking their curiosity and making them motivated to want to do the task. I really think that this has been helpful because it allows my students within a sense of to have a sense of excitement to work with me, because they know that I'm taking an interest in what they're interested in, and I'm there to help motivate them to do well. The second question that was asked was, how can I use theories of creativity and problem solving, including Dewey's thoughts, to make my instruction more problem-focused and authentic? As a classroom volunteer, I've been trying to really think about how I can do these things. One way that I thought about was I can make my instruction more problem-focused and authentic by using reflection, like Dewey discusses on page 10. I can use reflection upon the completion of certain tasks. For example, if my student just finished a book on volcanoes, I can ask them to reflect on what they were reading. I can also ask them to develop questions based upon those readings. For example, the lecture discussed how, as a way to inspire critical thinking and more problem-focused learning, that as a teacher, we need to provide our students with the space that encourages them to have questions. For example, by allowing my students to pick out the books that they read during our time together, it's allowed some of my students to be encouraged to formulate questions and to educate me on what they're learning. For example, I had a student say to me, "Did you know that there's a supervolcano under Yellowstone National Park?" I think this is a great thing because it's getting my students to think about things, and if they're saying these things to me, they're probably saying the same things at home, if not more so, because they feel more comfortable with their parents. The book also discussed that teachers need to help their students with being able to solve problems instead of giving solutions. What I can do, is work on ways to teach my student how to solve problems, how to ask critical questions, and to come up with an answer. The lecture also discussed that have its students brainstorm all the time. I think that this is a really important thing that I can do to work on the creativity and problem solving with my students. I can do this by having my students brainstorm over the material that they're reading. This gets them to formulate their own thought process, and it really gets them to think about critical questions that they may want to know. And it also helps them find a way to figure out the answers to the questions that they want to know. The lecture also discussed that you can have students compare and contrast. One way that I can do this with my readings is, for example, the students that are interested in volcanoes. I can have them compare and contrast regular volcanoes with supervolcanoes. Excuse my lack of scientific terms. I think that these are important ways to get our students to really think about problem solving, and it also brings about a level of creativity because it allows them different outlets to be able to succeed to answer those questions. Not every student is going to have the answer in a verbal manner. So one way that I can help my students go about this is I can allow them outlets to answer their own questions or pose questions in nonverbal ways. For example, I could let my students draw out pictures as a way to formulate their thought process, or as a way for them to present their ideas to me, where they're able to explain to me in their pictures how they came to their thought process. Those are some ways that I think as a volunteer I can work on creativity and problem solving with my students to make my instruction more problem-focused and authentic. Thank you so much for listening.